Welcome to the State of Mind Virtual Speaker Series. This series has been developed to provide education and support to youth, caregivers, and educators during this challenging time. This series is a collaboration between two local nonprofits, 1 in 5 and MindPeace, and various community mental health partners. We're glad you're here to educate yourself and to learn how to keep your brain in a healthy state of mind.
I just want to start off by introducing myself. I am Nancy Eigelmiller, and I'm the Executive Director of 1 in 5. And we are happy tonight to have Dr. Stuart Slavin with us. He is a pediatrician, and he does a lot of work in the wellness arena. And then we have 3 students from Xavier University. We have Danielle, Luke, and Cheyenne. And Stuart is going to talk about some research that we've done here locally in Cincinnati with students from 4 high schools here in Cincinnati. So Stuart, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Nancy. Yeah, pleasure to be here. And yeah, I guess I'll start by saying a little bit more. So I'm a pediatrician, but I was working at St. Louis University Medical School and got very interested in this issue of well-being of medical students. And people may or may not know that it's a huge problem that's been recognized for years, and finally people are starting to do something about it. But when I was at St. Louis University, I started getting involved in trying to kind of develop plans and programs to help students with their mental health. And one of the things that I was really struck by in the work with students was what I would describe as mindsets that they had that kind of they brought to their studies that I think contributed, not I think, that did contribute significantly to their distress. And as I was doing that work and kind of learning about those mindsets, one of the things I realized is that my 2 daughters, who were in kind of high school, I guess, maybe middle school to high school at that time, I recognized the same thought processes that going on in their heads, that this wasn't unique to medical students. And so that really prompted me after that work in medical school to start doing work looking at adolescent mental health and frankly, a fair amount of examination of these mindsets, which is what we'll talk about today. And the results I'm going to talk about aren't unique to Cincinnati, where we did surveys of students in 4 high schools. I've also done surveys of students in California, in Missouri, and the same patterns exist. Same absolute patterns exist. And maybe right off the bat, what I should say is these mindsets, you're not born with them. They develop, and you don't even choose them. They kind of develop as you go through this kind of educational continuum, starting in kindergarten, move up through high school and then beyond. And in a lot of ways, I think they develop unnoticed and kind of like unquestioned. You just go, oh, this is the way I think. And you don't really realize that they're even there. So what I'd love to do is kind of go through with some of them. And what I like to do is kind of describe them in kind of abstract terms, right? That they look like this. But what I'd love you all to kind of weigh in with is this, like, how did they play out with you? Did you feel like you experienced them? Were there certain situations where they kind of seemed to kind of manifest themselves, or do you think you've gotten better with them? So just your experience with them overall is what I would say. So the first 2 I'm going to kind of group together because they often kind of travel together, I think, which is one is what I describe as viewing your performance as your identity, right? So you get a grade in a class or an exam back, and you get a B, right? And you're hoping for an A. And rather than going, I got a B, you kind of feel like you are a B, right? It defines who you are rather than how you did. What goes with that too, especially if you have a performance that isn't ideal, is oftentimes accompanying that is the sense of like personalization and self-blame. That like I'm stupid, everybody else is smarter, I should have worked harder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And that we tend to kind of beat up on ourselves in some way. And that just, I think, for many students is kind of oftentimes just a natural way of thinking, right? So those are just the first two, and I see nods, so it doesn't sound like these concepts are alien to you. But I don't know, any of you want to say, you're all college students now, so you can speak to your high school experience, your college experience, and whether that kind of played out for you all or continues to, So anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I would be happy to jump in. Thank you for providing that explanation. I feel like I'm sure I was nodding a lot as you were talking because I can definitely relate to that. I think as I think back to high school, it started off almost very like innocently. Like I think a lot of the things I was involved with like became a part of my identity. And I saw myself, I was an athlete. And so I identified as a tennis player. And then I started joining clubs and I'm a member of this club, or I'm a member of the like random acts of kindness club or the service team or things like that. And so I think like when I would introduce myself, like that's how I like met people, and I would talk about the things that I'm involved with, and that just became a part of who I was and who I saw myself as. But I think as my time progressed in high school, it did become a lot of pressure, and I started noticing that if I wasn't able to go to meetings anymore, or if I wasn't able to, play my sport, like I got injured one year, it really kind of took a toll on me, and I like didn't really know who I was and like really struggled with that. And I put a lot of pressure on myself because I felt like I also had to be the best. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm just showing up as a member, but now I need to take these steps and I need to be a leader, or I need to constantly be doing the best or being the best. And so then I think it kind of shifted into more of that unhealthy mindset and trying to take it back and try and remember that like I'm not the things that I'm involved with. And like those play a huge piece in my life, but they do not define who I was. So trying to really separate myself has been difficult and is something that I still struggle with at times, but trying to view it more as like these activities shape who I am and inform who I am and give me light, but they're not all of who I am and don't define me.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think that one of the things I would say to that, is it's not that it's all bad, right? We can, right? What you do can definitely shape your identity. It's really that when it's combined with this sense of, and we'll talk about this in a second, is perfectionism, right? Is I've got to be best. I've got to be best. And then if you don't measure up, then it's more painful, right? Because if that performance defines who you are versus what you've done, the impact is different, right? No, you can say, no, that's how I did, or that's a part of me, but no, like I'm secure in who I am. I'm not going to let that define me in some way. So yeah, Danielle, I think you really nailed it with that. I don't know, Cheyenne or Luke, anything to add to that?
With me, I can 100% relate to what you said. When I moved here from England when I was 14, I moved in the middle of the semester and I moved to one of the schools you study, Mason High School. And I think that's really when this mindset kicked in for me, because not only was I playing catch up with everything I'd previously missed due to school years being different, I wasn't at the beginning, my grades were not good, and I was just so like disappointed in myself because I knew I could do better. But at the same time, I accidentally skipped a grade because my birthday is September 2nd and we write the birthdays the other way. So I missed a whole year of education and I'm catching up, and I'm developing like the mindset going to Mason that, oh, I need to have an A in every class and everyone has an A and I'm barely scraping through. But yeah, that was tough, and I still kind of catch myself doing it today.
Yeah, they're hard to leave behind, right? I mean, it really is. And that's so interesting that you also, it sounds like, were really influenced by the culture you walked into, right? Everybody else is like, oh, it's all A's, it's all A's, it's all A's. And then you're supposed to, oh, that's what I'm supposed to be like too. I'm supposed to, fit in. I have to be charged like that too. We'll come to this in a second too, Cheyenne, is there's this element of new situations are often ones where these vulnerabilities can come in, right? And transitions to new places, new challenges are oftentimes where these mindsets kind of even flare more. And how about you, Luke? Anything else to say to this?
Yeah, to build off of everything that's been said already, I'm just thinking about like the subcultures within our high school experiences that existed. I'm just reflecting back on mine, and the idea that comes to mind is that the opposite is also true. So how we identify ourselves through what we're involved in is how we identify everyone else, right? So with my experience, I happen to have integrated into my high school through a middle school system that was closely related to like a brother or sister school by the same name. So by the time I entered into my freshman year, everybody pretty much already knew everyone. With the student population of 2,000 people, everyone knew who we were, but more what everyone else was involved in. And that was just a really interesting part of everyone has their niche, and that sort of like stress of not knowing where you sort of fit in within these different social groups can definitely play a big role in how we progress through those 4 years.
Yeah, I think so true as well. And that influence of peer groups is huge, and because they can really shape the way we think in really profound ways. And one of the things that Nancy knows is we asked people in the surveys, high school students too, like how much they compare themselves to others, right? What we found, which is really interesting, was it wasn't just on grades, right? Obviously, people are comparing themselves and measuring themselves based on grades, but it was like extracurricular activities and leadership activities. It's like the whole gamut. And I think there was this sense really of like this race, right? And you better be at the front of the race or you're in trouble, right? Or there's some terrible outcome if you aren't ahead, right? And that's another dangerous place to be, is if you're always comparing yourself and always measuring yourself compared to others, it can be really much more distressing, much more stressful. Okay, the next two that I want to talk about, because and they're different, but they sometimes kind of travel together, I think, as I kind of mentioned perfectionism, but there's actually a side of perfectionism called maladaptive perfectionism. And perfectionism, and it involves two things, basically. Maladaptive perfectionism means setting the bar really high for yourself, right? That perfectionistic tendency, but then a feeling of discrepancy, of distance between what your performance is and what your standards are. And so if you have these really high standards that are really in some ways oftentimes impossible to keep up, and you're not meeting it, can cause huge distress. And with this, and the next mindset, which is really interesting as well, is called imposter phenomenon, which is just a feeling like you're an imposter, you're a fraud, you're not as smart as everybody thinks, and it's only a matter of time before like other people figure it out. You've just been fooling people, right? Both of those, what we found is if you have, and there are screening tools for this, you can actually do this with survey instruments to see if somebody screens positive for imposter or maladaptive perfectionism. If you do in a high school population, or if you do as a medical student, if you screen positive for either of those, you're much more likely to be depressed or anxious. So what that mindset does is it actually has an impact on the health of our brains and how we view ourselves. And it's hard to say causation, but I think there is kind of this sense that the more perfectionistic you are and the more you're not measuring up, like it can make you anxious, can make you depressed, right? And I'm curious about those, if that like resonates with you too, in terms of just those mindsets and how they can have an impact on your mood, how you feel, how you worry, how you feel about yourself, those kind of things. So how about Cheyenne or Luke this time? Go first.
I definitely resonate with this a lot. So I very quickly found out what my strengths and weaknesses are, in terms of academic subjects. But because I excelled in a certain subject, I felt like I had to be excellent at all of them. So that led me into not only signing up for like the advanced level classes for that one subject I felt confident in, I found myself signing up for all of them. And that was a really big reality shock when I found that I was not performing like at the same level in all of those classes. So just speaking from that personal experience, I definitely switched levels in a couple of them through my junior and senior year. And that experience led me into learning that we do have our strengths and weaknesses, and both are great. And that awareness will allow us to figure out more as we progress through our academic journey, what we can focus on, what we can do better. And yeah.
No, I like that idea of that you don't have to be great at everything, right? It's okay to excel in certain areas and recognize that, right? I think one of the things, and this is a little tangent, but I just have to say that, and you can comment on this as well, is I think a lot of this is really in high school, it's about the college pursuit. You know, it feels like it's not good enough just to be good at like math. No, you need like, straight A's or, multiple APs, or you're not going to be competitive for the colleges you want to be competitive at. So I think that kind of college oriented culture also kind of creates this pressure, on you, Luke, probably to say, oh man, I better load up on honors or AP classes. Because if I don't, I'm not going to look like a serious student or something. So yeah, that's another, I think, is how the educational culture, and especially the college pursuit, it like feeds this stuff. Right? It's not just
Absolutely.
like you choose this. There's a cultural push for you to experience those. Yeah. Others? Cheyenne, you?
Well, I'll focus on two different things, one from like a high school perspective and a college perspective. So at Mason, what I experienced and what I kind of saw was how everyone was so competitive about their GPA. The valedictorian my graduating year had a 5.0 GPA. And
Nancy, I heard that. Nancy and I heard, like, I didn't know a 5.0 was possible, right? I mean, it's like,
yeah. I think he was like 16 as well, and he was in my grade.
Oh, wow.
Oops. That was my senior year. And yeah, it's okay. The sound just cut out for me for a second, but that was really crazy at graduation with, the valedictorian. It was like a 5.0 and then like a 4.98 and a 4.97. And it was just crazy because like, other than Mason, I don't know anyone that's had like went to a high school where they had like that high of a GPA. And just in my classes, everyone was just so competitive about having like a high 3, a 4. I knew people that had 4 5s that were upset with themselves that they didn't have like a 4 6. I was like,
and it sounds crazy, doesn't it, Cheyenne? I mean, as you talk about it, like somebody with a 4.5 average, who, who's not happy with it. That's where the culture has kind of gone amiss, right? But keep going. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, and like I knew people with 4.5s or 4.4 and they weren't in the top 10 or 15% in my graduating class.
Right. Yeah.
I had a friend, she was like crying because she was like, I'm not in the top 10 anymore. I only have a 4.48. I was like, and like it was such a big grade too. So I'm like, that's a lot of students that have that high of a GPA.
Yeah.
And then others that just missed a mark by a little bit that are beating themselves up because they didn't meet. I just always thought that was insane. I was like, that environment was definitely interesting. I just, in England, you don't have GPA. So I was kind of confused for a while what it even meant. But then, people here just, so yeah, that was crazy. But in my college experience, I see myself getting really upset when I get, like you mentioned before, like getting like a B or like a C on like a single test, and it just like drains the energy out of me, or just like makes me feel bad about myself. And I'm like, I should have worked harder. What did I like? Just that perfectionist mindset. Like I should have worked harder, and I didn't work hard enough. Yeah, and just beating
Yeah,
yourself
that's
over
what
and
we go to so often. Is it's again, it's that
Mm-hmm.
personalization and self-blame. I mean, where sometimes you go, you know, it was a ridiculous test, or the grading of that paper was absurd. That was a darn good paper, right? But that's not where we go. Oftentimes it's like, no, it was my fault. I should have done this. I should have done that. When in reality, working harder may not have made a difference at all, right? I mean, and so
Mm-hmm.
no, I think you're exactly right. The key, I think, also, just to say quickly, is that you don't want to give up on on wanting to perform well, right? When we're talking about these mindsets, some people say, it's about not caring at all. No, we want people to care. And a friend of mine who's a therapist said, what it should be is a healthy pursuit of excellence rather than an unhealthy pursuit of perfection. That's the place you're trying to get. And it isn't even that you're trying to get yourself happy when you get a B or a C, but just not to be kind of tormented, right? Or to feel like you're a horrible person, or your future is over, or those kind of things. I think that's where you're at. Danielle, anything else to add to those?
Yeah, I mean, I can really relate to everything that's been shared. I think it's interesting, especially at the high school level, because there is so much pressure with colleges, and every college wants students who are well-rounded. So it's not like I'm just gonna focus on the couple of things that I know I'm really good at and get really involved with those. But because colleges want people who are well-rounded, it's pushing people to seek out all of these different opportunities. And then it's not good enough to say, oh, well, I'm really good at this, or I'm a great leader in this, and then just be a participant in other activities or extracurriculars, or not do as well in some subjects and do better in other subjects. So I think that can be really difficult. And I think it's interesting that you paired imposter syndrome and perfectionism, because I know that that's something I've struggled a lot with, because I feel like part of my brain is always telling me, like, I need to be the best, I need to do well, I need to be a leader, I need to get straight A's, or whatever the case may be. But then another part of me feels like I don't deserve the things or the opportunities that I've been given, or telling myself, like, oh, I'm in this position, but like, if they really knew like what I was struggling with, or like, I feel like it's not like I'm not doing a good enough job. So it's this like constant tug and pull of like, I feel like I should be doing this, but also feeling like I'm not good enough to be doing that, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah,
So
no,
it's
it does. It
interesting.
does. I think that's a really nice way of saying how all of these can kind of play out together, right? It isn't like just one at a time. They all kind of have these layers that connect to each other. And two more that I want to go to, if that's okay. Yeah. Anything else, Danielle? Or are you good? Yeah. Um, we're really talking about thoughts, right? Like thoughts in your head and how they play out. But one of the things we did in our research with medical students, as I said, those who had maladaptive perfectionism or imposter were much more likely to be depressed or anxious. There was actually an intermediate step, I think, that also was there, which was the feelings that those thoughts cause, right? And so the feelings we asked about were feelings of inadequacy, even embarrassment, or shame. Shame meaning being the most powerful and the most negative of those feelings. And again, what we found was those who had perfectionism or imposter were much more likely to have inadequacy, embarrassment, or shame. And those who had inadequacy, embarrassment, or shame were much more likely to have depression or anxiety. So that's the other, is this connection between thoughts and emotions. It can be really powerful too. So again, I would just ask you guys, and you know what, maybe I'm going to throw one more concept in just to make sure we have time, because I don't want to just talk about these mindsets and then leave you like with nothing to do. That we got to get to the piece where no, you can actually change these things, right? No, the other one that I think is interesting, and I think it plays out with emotions, is something called Stanford Duck. So Stanford undergrads came up with it, but this exists at other colleges. I just like that one the most, though. So stand for duck. If you imagine this duck like floating along the water, like so calm, so peaceful, just not moving a muscle, and they're just gliding forward. But if you look under the surface, their little feet are paddling like crazy, right? So what the Stanford undergrads were talking about is like putting this mask on. Oh yeah, everything's fine. I'm cool, like that. Not showing any vulnerability, not showing any weakness. And so what you have when you have these deep emotions of inadequacy, embarrassment, or shame, or these thoughts of perfectionism, and everybody's walking, in your environment like looks like they have it together. A lot of times the feeling is really isolating. So you go like, oh my gosh, like I'm the only one who's feeling this way. And I think it can intensify those feelings. So yeah, how about those feelings and then that Stanford doc? Do you think, is that is it part of the culture, do you think? I mean, obviously with close friends, you may really just disclose, but I think with others, our tendency is not it's to hide any sign of weakness or vulnerability or something like that. So again, I don't know who wants to start. Luke, you want to jump in on this one, or Cheyenne, did you go first yet? No, you didn't go first yet. You go for it.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I think personally with the emotions thing, that might even just go for like the stigma behind mental health and not wanting to talk about how you feel. So, if you are like overwhelmed, anxious, just kind of having a hard time, and then you see everyone else around you putting on like a, seeming like they have it all together. When I've interacted with people, I feel like that is really common. This semester, especially, I think with just all of us being kind of virtual, hybrid, I just believe people are kind of just bottling in everything, but then also they have their workload and a job and clubs, and they're just trying to keep busy. But we're also staring at a laptop screen for the majority of our days. So I think recently I've been speaking to people and they seem to be really burnt out and having a really hard time right now. Yeah, and it's like their emotions, I think even from like before, it's like being burnt out from not having a break, or whether it's just like it hard during like COVID, I call it COVID semester. Yeah, just trying to get through it. And then the duck thing, I think that's so accurate. I think a lot of people, when they do see someone looking okay, surface level, surface level, they look like they can present themselves, they look like they're not having a hard time, and then I don't know, I feel like a lot of the time you think that they look fine, so you're like, oh, I guess I'm the only one in this situation, I'm overthinking it. But I think that kind of goes back to what I said about stigma with mental health. People don't want to talk about the bad things, they want to seem like they're okay.
Yeah, it's so important. That stigma is profound. It's very interesting, just a quick aside, because one of the things I've found, whether it's with medical students, residents, high school students, one of the things I think that opens the door to people being more open about it is to actually talk mindsets. I think it's a big leap for people to talk about their mental health, about depression or anxiety, if they won't even open up about how they're thinking. And so what I've found sometimes is it's kind of a nice bridge to say, let's talk about the way you're thinking. Let's talk about the way you're feeling, so that people don't have these walls built up, which are really, I think, incredibly, I don't know, painful and problematic. So yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Sean. Danielle or Luke.
I think, sorry. Just to add like a little thing onto the conversation about stigma, what I was envisioning back to my high school experience was the situation when someone received the note in the classroom about going to the principal's office or going to the guidance counselor's office for whatever reason. And that just drew so much attention in the classroom or down the hall. And then afterwards, everyone wants to know what's up, right? And just thinking about how those conversations aren't happening unless we see someone else experiencing that situation, whatever it may be. Speaking from a little story from my senior year. So I actually got called down to the guidance counselor because I neglected to sign off on one thing for my graduation, like certificate that I would receive for graduating. And when I came back, everyone was like, "What happened? Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yes, I just did not sign all of the forms. I didn't have like the actual like a mental need to be seeing a guidance counselors because that's automatically where our minds go to
Wow.
when we hear that word, you know?"
And do you think, actually, just a quick follow-up, do you think, maybe this is hard to say, do you think that those questions are out of concern? Or like, I don't know, I'm not sensing that there was something else going on. Like, I don't know what it would be. Can you put a name to it, Luke? Like somehow, like if you were suffering from a mental health problem, I don't know, that made him feel better in some way? I'm just speculating. Do you have any idea what that was about, do you think?
Yeah, well, it was definitely my close friends that asked me the more like concerning questions, but I would also as I'm walking down the hall, see people being like, "Oh, why is he going over there?"
Yeah.
And maybe it's out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, maybe just a curiosity, but I'm not sure it's a curiosity that was really out of concern for you. But maybe I'm just too cynical, but I don't know. It's interesting.
I think
But
it's
I just
that stigma of mental health, you know, where
yeah,
it's like,
it is. You're right, Nancy. It is. It's just associated with their stigma. There's taboo. Oh, they're
right.
going off
Oh
into
no,
this.
oh no,
Ooh,
what's wrong with you? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. How about you, Danielle?
Yeah, Luke, it's interesting you provide that example. I mean, I struggled with depression and anxiety for most of high school, and for a while, like I thought that mindset was just normal, and I thought that it was just kind of like a normal part of things, and then it eventually escalated to the point where like I realized that it was not normal. But I just remember in high school, I was always known as the kid who like always had a smile on her face and was just like very bubbly and just like everyone loved, like I loved seeing people in the hallways. And I was even just so afraid to go into the guidance counselor's office and like open up for help because like of that stigma, and I didn't know what people were going to think. And I was so worried that if I took that mask off and let people see what was really behind that smile, that they were going to like think I was crazy or like know all of those things that I was struggling with. So I feel like for me, it took me a long time to just even get to that point where I could open up to somebody and be like, "Hey, no, like this is how I'm feeling, like this is what I'm thinking." And like part of me knew that it like wasn't normal, but then also part of me was like trying to justify it and tell myself that everybody was fine, like I was fine, and everybody goes through this, and like everybody wants to be the best and everyone's trying to get A's, like we're all struggling. But trying to get to that point of realizing like, no, it doesn't have to be this way. Like we can get help and we can open up and we can find ways to support each other and like take that stress and pressure and just like take a breath and relieve it. That there is help out there. So yeah, I definitely think it's very interesting to think about all of that.
Yeah, Danielle, thanks for sharing that. There's a lot there. I think one of the things, honestly, that worries me about what's going on right now in high schools across this country, not just Cincinnati, is that I think it's almost like this mental state that people can, we can do surveys of students. I think the school with the highest, and this wasn't a Cincinnati school, the school with the highest percentage of students with moderate to severe symptoms of depression. So I'm not even including the milds. Moderate to severe was 54% of the students. Okay. A majority of the students were suffering from significant symptoms of depression. Okay. And I think when you have a culture like that it's that widespread, what is really easy to, I think, feel like is like these feelings are just normal. Like this is just what a high school student is supposed to feel like. And whether it's anxiety, depression, et cetera. I think that's probably what you were experiencing, Danielle, until you got to a point where it was like, oh no, like this isn't okay. But I worry that there's this kind of not even low grade, I mean, low and moderate grade mental health struggles that people are facing, that they don't even recognize as that they're suffering in that way, you know? And so it's one of the things that I think is so important of the work, you know, related to mental health is like shining a light on this stuff, right? And to realize that when, especially today, oh my gosh, if you know, if you're a student who's in a school where like 50% of the kids are depressed, it's hard to say that that's some kind of weakness as an individual or something, or that like it's your fault, or there's some kind of pathology. No, what it says is the culture and environment is toxic to the mental health and well-being of the kids in it. And we need to start operating from this lens of like, it isn't just, you know, we're not going to therapy our way out of this. You know, we can't have enough therapists to see all those kids with depression. So the only way we're ever going to deal with this is more of a preventive approach. You know, that has to be, and that's what I care deeply about. So maybe, Nancy, is it okay if I transition over to, because I'd love to talk a little bit about what you can do. I mean, because what I love about it
that would be great.
is a lot of the strategies, or the main strategy, is really comes from cognitive behavioral therapy. And cognitive behavioral therapy, I mean, for those listening who may not have heard of it before, is a type of therapy that basically is still kind of the best treatment for anxiety. It's helpful in depression. So many people who, if they're having struggles like this, you can see a therapist, they're going to give you cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's also very interesting. It's the kind of the gold standard treatment, actually, for maladaptive perfectionism and also for imposter phenomenon. So if you suffer from those and saw a therapist, this is the vast majority would give you that kind of therapy. You know, they wouldn't be kind of going back through like, tell me about your childhood and your relationship with your parents. They might do that, but this is very kind of skill-based to give you these cognitive skills to manage your thoughts in different ways. And the most important thing I probably can say is while these mindsets feel like they are fixed and unchangeable, no, every single one of them are. And some people are actually able to do this work on their own. That's what we found with our medical students. You know, we would give them an hour-long thing on these mindsets and then and how to kind of manage those mindsets. And many of them did better just with that, because the concepts aren't that difficult to understand. What's hard is a lot of these patterns of thinking have been there for years, though. And like even talking about what you do, it's very easy to understand. It's not like you flip a switch, though, and suddenly you can do this stuff, right? So as I talk about this, it's like practice. This stuff takes practice. But the cognitive behavioral techniques are really, I think it's kind of based on this idea, like, why don't we teach these techniques to everybody? Like, why do we wait till you need a therapist before we give these to you? And I think when you hear them, I think you'll understand why, like, I'm so passionate about saying, no, like, we shouldn't wait till you're depressed to give you these things. Let's give you these things so you don't get depressed, right? And so 3 simple steps. That's all it is 3 simple steps. One is you have to be present and aware enough in your life to just notice, right, your thinking. And if people are so busy and frantic and that we don't kind of slow down enough to just notice our thoughts, right, and recognize our patterns, or even kind of just thinking about our thinking and recognizing certain thought patterns. The second one that you want to do is, after you notice these thoughts, and especially there can be triggers to noticing, like if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling depressed, like you go like, well, what's going on in my head right now? What am I thinking about? And then what you want to do is you want to label it. So you want to go, oh, I'm doing that maladaptive perfectionism, or I'm doing the imposter, or oh my gosh, I'm back to thinking of my performance as identity, all those, right? The key here, though, is it's really important, and sometimes it's hard to do this, is you want to do that like with some self-compassion. right? You don't want to go, oh my gosh, I'm doing that perfectionistic thinking, like I'm such a loser. That's like the last thing you want to do is beat up in yourself in the process. And even if you can't get to a place of compassion, just you want to be just neutral about it. You just kind of like almost want to step outside your body and go, look what I'm doing there. All right. And it used to be thought by therapists that you had to go on to the third step for therapeutic value. But there are a lot of people who are now thinking that, no, if you just do those first two steps, actually, that you'll actually benefit from it. But if you can, what you want to do is to go to the third step, which is disputing, right? To take that mindset and say, you know what? Like, that's not so accurate. Let's see if I can think a different way. And there are really two kind of approaches. I'll tell you one, and then the second one is my favorite one. The first one is just real simple, which is like, what's the evidence that this thought is true? Like, if I'm feeling like an awful person, or I'm like, completely down on myself, or I'm feeling stupid or whatever, right? Then you kind of look at it and say, well, what's the evidence? Like, I'm in college, I've done pretty well. Yeah, I didn't do well on this quiz, but I feel pretty good about myself, right? And this is just one event, and like, I shouldn't give it that much weight, right? So that's one. But the one I used to tell medical students that's still kind of my favorite, I think, approach is what's called the double standard. And the double standard is, let's say your best friend in high school or college, they come up to you and they say, oh, I feel so bad. I just got this B- on this exam. I mean, would you say to them, well, you're stupid? You're a failure. You don't measure up. You're never going to get a decent grade. You're never going to, graduate with honors, and you're never going to be successful in the future. No, of course not. You wouldn't say that to somebody, right? But we're often so comfortable like using that voice with ourselves, literally a voice you would use with no one else. And actually, if somebody talked to you with the voice you use, like, you'd be furious. Like, that's outrageous. How could you say that to me? But we're very comfortable with these really brutal self-critical voices, which we need to recognize that we're doing that, right? And to say, like, no, I don't have to think that way. I can choose to think differently. And that's what it is. It's about making it a choice. And I think one of the things that's most difficult, though, for students, like, I can describe that. Well, two things that make it difficult to give up those patterns of thinking. One is you've been thinking that way for a long time, right? And there are these neural pathways that are just super highways that go to that place. And sometimes, they go to that place and you can unravel them, right? But it can take a while, right? And so there's a rewiring, literally a rewiring of your brain, I think, that happens that's kind of needed. And that's why it kind of takes time. The second, though, barrier is that I think a lot of time, and I've talked to medical students about this, they think they need to beat up on themselves or their performance will drop. If I ease off on myself, if I lower my standards, then somehow, I'm not going to do as well. And I think that's absolutely false. It's absolutely false, because in many ways, if those feelings are contributing to depression or anxiety, depression and anxiety are not good for learning, okay? So if you can escape depression and anxiety, you're actually probably going to learn better. So that's all it is like, notice, label, and try to dispute, argue, come up with an argument against that framework that you're thinking of, and be willing to let go of those mindsets that can feel so powerful, like that they have a hook in you, right? And then what I always say, and I'm glad I'm thinking of it now, is if that work is too difficult to do on your own, right? If you go like, that hole is too deep, the place is too dark, I'm suffering too much, see a therapist. Or even if you feel like you could do pretty well, see a therapist, because a lot of times I think there's fear like, oh, if I see a therapist, it means I'm crazy, or that it means like I'm committing to like years of therapy or something. That's not the case. Cognitive behavioral therapy, I mean, you can make significant progress in 6 or 8 visits. It can be very short term because they're just giving you the tools with worksheets and other things like that and talk to help you like work through these. So I think that's a really important message. And Nancy, you may want to add into this. I think there's this idea that if you're going into therapy, it's like a long-term commitment. Yeah. One last thing I'll say, and then Nancy can respond to this, is that yeah, I talked with a therapist just a couple of weeks ago who works with medical students a lot and medical residents. And she said, there are people she sees that it's like 1 or 2 visits, you know, and why that can be so effective, and see what you guys think of this. A lot of times students have never been told about this stuff. Like they didn't realize that there was actually a different way of thinking or a different way of living, right? And if you give them this information, and you guys are all smart, a lot of times like students can run with it, especially if they're not already really, you know, depressed or super anxious. They're struggling, but not suffering in that kind of way. They actually can make progress on their own just with this basic information. So Nancy, do you want to add something to that? And then I want to hear from the students.
The thing that I would say, you know, I think that, you know, we work with a lot of students in schools, and I think that there's this perfectionism that is rampant in schools today.
Yeah.
Rampant.
Yeah.
And how do we start to reverse that pattern? And I totally agree with the mindset that we need to start working on reversing it, and people have tools in place that they can say, no, that's just not true.
Absolutely.
I'm smart. I had a bad day.
Absolutely.
Imagine that.
Right. And we didn't talk about, I mean, there are a whole bunch of cognitive distortions I'll mention quickly here, not to, I don't want to go long, but that's just, you know, a second piece of this, which is, really quickly, we tend to go through life thinking like some of that bad event happens, that's like the outcome, right? But no, it's the thoughts that we attach to it. It's our reaction to them. And there are all sorts of distorted ways we think about that are kind of fuel for the mindsets we talked about. Like magnification. I can't remember which one of you said, like, I guess you, Cheyenne, about like this C, or right, or a B, and like it all of a sudden blows up into a big event when it's just one quiz or one exam in like a whole group of them. But it's really easy for us to blow those up. There's also something called all or none thinking, where you get the result you want or you're a failure. There's no gray area that I did pretty well, right? There can be things like overgeneralization, where you take one bad event, you convince yourself, oh, this is another example of bad things that always happen to you. Or tunnel vision, one more, which is like just focusing on this negative event and discounting all the positive things in your life or about yourself, right? Those are the things that accompany those mindsets that I think are part of this as well, that you also want to kind of develop skills in kind of being able to identify those and label, right? And I'm convinced, like, if we can give students these tools, I honestly, like when I hear your story, Danielle, I think some of that pain could have been avoided, you know, that early on for students to understand, like, no, you don't have to be perfect. And the last thing I'll add to that, which I think is at the core of it, is this fundamental mythical belief, which is false, that getting into the most elite, prestigious college is like the most important thing. And if you don't, you're like, your path in life is going to be forever complicated. And the evidence against that is so overwhelming. That's kind of the saddest piece of this whole race, is that in this documentary film, actually, it says race to nowhere. Like, no, it much more depends on you than the college you go to. Where you'll end up in life. That's in you, not necessarily like what name is on your diploma. And so we need to, Nancy, I think, really work on convincing students that, just try hard,
Right.
You know, healthy pursuit of excellence. And you know, that's what it's about. Be a good human being. Let's simplify this stuff, right? In many ways. So
Go
I
to
don't know.
where it makes you happy, and there you have there are opportunities that fit into what you're trying to do in your life. Don't try to fit into somebody else's ideal.
Yep. And this idea that there's like one dream school or this perfect place for you is just makes no sense at all.
No.
Should
So
we do
before
one more?
we're running out of time here, but
Yeah.
I would like these guys to react to this last part of it. What do you?
Yeah, especially the tools. Yeah, does that make sense? Does it seem like there's hope, right? I mean, that's right. So yeah, anybody jump in.
Yeah, wow, so many great insights there. I think as I like think back on my journey, at the beginning, it was so hard because like once I started becoming more aware of those mindsets and aware of those cognitive distortions, I immediately jumped to this place of like judgment and shame, and I would beat myself up about it. And I'm like, well, I shouldn't be thinking that way. Or even now, like feel like I get caught in these headspaces of like, I've been through therapy, like I've learned about the cognitive distortions, learned how to reframe them, and I'll like notice myself getting caught in these thoughts and like applying to grad school and feeling all those same pressures of needing to get into the same place. And I'll catch myself and I'm like, wow, like, no, I shouldn't be thinking that way. And then I like judge myself for thinking that way. And I'm like, okay, let's take a step back. Let's reframe it. Something that's been really helpful for me, I think like journaling and being able to write it all out, I think that helps me like separate, get it all out on paper, and then I can like go through and labeling it.
Yeah.
I've also gotten into a habit lately where I'll like record myself and like make it look like I'm talking on the phone, but I'll just like be talking my thoughts out loud. And I think that like helps me separate and like helps me kind of get it outside of myself. And then I can go back and listen to the recordings and I'm like, oh yeah, like there's a cognitive distortion, or like I was doing like magnifying, or I was creating all or nothing thinking. And like I don't always notice it when it's like in my head, but when I'm able to separate it, I like realize I'm more aware of it, and then I can kind of reframe that and shift that thinking. But
yeah, no, that's so much richness in what you just said, Daniela. And one of the things I would say that I think is really important, I think sometimes we think when we do therapy or when we use these skills that the goal is to eliminate these thoughts. No, like it's to recognize them and say, oh, there they are again, right? And I think there's sometimes disappointment, and the place that they show up again is like when you're about to, there's a new hurdle in front of you, right? Now I'm going to apply to grad school. Now I'm going to do this. Now I'm in this new job. It's in those next transitions that these tend to really be exaggerated. And that's the other, is to recognize that these kind of can be temporary things, right? And not having a fixed versus, I mean, not having a fixed mindset, but a growth mindset like that. It's not always going to be like that, right? Right. So I think really important what you said. So fantastic. And
Cheyenne or Luke, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I really liked what you said about kind of, you know, if your friend had a bad grade or something like that, or like a B minus on the test, you wouldn't be so aggressive or like rude to them about like their progress or anything to do with anything. And I think that's just something I feel like a lot of people need to apply to themselves, just like the kindness and just patience, I would say as well, that everything isn't always going to be smooth sailing. My parents have told me enough times, but I think sometimes I still just kind of dismiss it because it's like my parents. But that's really reassuring to hear that. I think I should definitely focus on that.
yeah, no, that's really sweet. I think you're absolutely right with all of that. You know, it's and some of that kindness, some of the kindest people I've met have so little kindness for themselves. They spread it around everywhere they go. They're so forgiving, they're so understanding, but that inner voice, right? So it's like, no, it's like just find a little bit of that, direct it towards yourself. You deserve it, exactly. Right? Luke?
Yeah, just to add a little bit, when you were mentioning all of this, when you're describing flipping the switch, you used the word reverse. And that really stuck out to me because I really like that language for making the change, because personally, I would challenge myself to almost take that word literally. So if I'm thinking of school life as a competition, then I'm going to focus on doing my best and recognizing that my best is enough. Or if I'm overwhelmed with all of my responsibilities, then I'm going to try to focus more on the little things, as Danielle was mentioning.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really good. And there's this kind of perspective on life, right? Which is just saying, I mean, even doing your best doesn't mean maxing out, right? That's the other. I think sometimes people think of, if I'm doing well, then the way to do better is to do more, like study more, and it isn't necessarily, right? I think that what we also have to recognize is know that I think sometimes people feel like investing in your well-being, exercise or doing things you enjoy, like takes away from your performance, right? That it's an either or. But no, we need for people to really realize that investing in well-being is actually an investment in your performance, right? So to embrace that piece of it, I think is important as well. I'm going to say before you, Nancy, you guys have been awesome. And thanks so much. This is I've never done something like this with students, and it's a pleasure. You guys are remarkable. So yeah, really awesome that you joined us.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight, and we love your perspective on everything. You're speaking our language. You're speaking our language of what's happening out there, and you'll help us be able to change it. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great.
All right, Stuart,
Cool.
thank you for being with us tonight, and I hope everybody has a good evening.
A special thank you to our State of Mind speakers and to you for joining us. More videos and educational resources can be found at 1in5's website. If you feel like you or your child is in need of professional support, therapists are available. Please refer to Mindpiece's school-based or community resource page. For a mental health crisis or emergencies, patients and families are encouraged to contact their current mental health provider first. This allows the mental health provider who knows your child best to provide support and direction. If your child does not have a mental health provider and they are experiencing a non-life-threatening mental health crisis, you are encouraged to contact the Psychiatric Intake Response Center at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. 513-636-4124. Call 911 or go to the emergency department if you are experiencing a medical emergency, a life-threatening mental health crisis, or are directed to go there by a medical provider. This will help limit the spread of COVID-19 in our community and allow our emergency departments to care for patients with the most critical needs first.